and this is a special partnership with Magnum Photographs with the Prix Pictet that we have been conducting all over the year, and this is our third talk, and we will be having David Uzochukwu and Myriam Boulos. David has been commissioned by the World Wildlife Fund and exhibited at Photo Vogue Festival and the New Black Vanguard at Rencontre d'Art. He has been nominated for an ICP Infinity Award and named One to Watch by the British Journal of Photography. We're also joined by Beirut-based Lebanese Magnum nominee, Myriam Boulos, whose work has been published in Vogue, Time, Vanity Fair, and it has been exhibited all over the world. So, David and Myriam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So first of all, as I mentioned, you have both become very well-known photographers quite quickly. How did you find your calling so young?
Ooh, okay. So I'm gonna try not to go too far, but at first I used to play flute and grow, and I thought that this is what I'm gonna do in my life. And then when I was still at school, I met a girl who became one of my closest friends, and she had this sophisticated camera, and I told my parents I want the same, and my mom told me no. She told me you have to develop your gaze before getting the expensive object. And from this moment it became the most fluid and obvious thing in my life, I think. Yeah.
What about you, David? I heard you also fell in love with photography.
Yes, it's actually quite, I realized at some point, I kept saying, oh, it was just this super random thing, and at some point I remembered that it wasn't entirely random, and that aged maybe 11 or so, I had this holiday crush who was really into photography at that point, and for some reason I got home and I was like, ooh, I'm so interested in photography right now. So yeah, that's how I got started, and then I was really lucky to, I delved into the photography community online and found a lot of people who were doing really exciting things, and after maybe a year or two of just kind of following along people's photography journeys, I started to kind of get into it myself as well. Yeah.
Why do you think it was photography as opposed to any other medium?
I can start. For me personally, photography is a medium made perfectly for me because I'm a very shy person, and I'm obsessed with people, and with photography it's a way of getting closer to people, and at the same time I always need to, I feel I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I always feel I'm kind of one step away from reality, and photography brings me closer to reality. It's this thing that exteriorizes everything that is bottled up inside. Yeah.
What about you, Dave?
I definitely relate. And for me, I think it was also a way of making use both of interesting or beautiful moments that I thought were quite hard to let go of, and to start building an archive of that, and to then begin actually making use of them and incorporating literally those images or recreating those moments in kind of staged settings. Yeah, so kind of a compulsion to grab.
Yeah, we'll go back to, I think, reality and fantasy in a second, as everybody can see behind us. But it's funny you mentioned obsessions, because when I was researching your work and a lot of the interviews you've given over the past years, you keep mentioning the word obsession. So what are these obsessions that you have in photography?
I don't know if I can talk about them concretely, because it's mainly things that I do not know how to put words on, so I explore them through images, but it's always things that are inside of me, that I literally obsess on. For example, when I started photography, I always needed to question the society in Beirut where I live and my place in it, and I did this through photography. And then I wanted to understand and question the patriarchal society in which we live, and I did this also through a photo series. And then also with the revolution and the situation in Lebanon, it's the same. It was my way of taking part in it. And also with my, I don't know if I'm answering too much, but I'm gonna go ahead anyway. With my ongoing series on women's sexual fantasies, it's also something that was like kind of an obsession for me since I discovered my own sexual fantasies. And I decided to work on this, and yeah, I think it answers in a way the question.
It's a tricky question. It takes a lot of self-awareness, but I think, I mean, in general, I'm obsessed with, or I mean, the question of obsession is definitely something that, you know, work keeps circling around. I think I'm really interested in creating things that I would be obsessed with, or that feel like I would need to see them. Like maybe I'm obsessed with what feels new and unseen to me. And I'm also obsessed with anything that in a way feels maybe non-binary, that just holds and combines various maybe contrasting qualities into one like holistic ensemble. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
I love how our works are very different, but the essence of them are kind of have similarities. Yeah. I'm not taking over your.
No, please. That's why we brought you together, because we thought you had so much in common. I mean, you've said so many times you're obsessed with the present moments, and your images of human bodies, and that's what we're talking about today, photographing bodies, are very physical, they're very tactile. Does that come from your history of, the country that you grew up in, the revolution that you lived through in Beirut? I mean, you've said before Beirut is a fragmented country. Have you been trying to put it together with your photographs somehow?
Ooh, interesting. I never thought of it like this. But when you mentioned the present moment, I think that it comes mainly from a failure of the present moment in real life and a way of trying to be present through images and take space through images. And it's also, as I said, a way of getting closer to people. Like I'm fascinated by, for example, during the revolution, I was fascinated by the proximity of the skins and the bodies. I'm not sure why, but it's something that speaks to me and that I need to have in my images. And yeah. Yes.
What about you, David? I mean, you're also interested in the present moment. Sometimes your images seems to extend from reality and the present moment into something more into the fantastical realm.
Yeah, I think like you said before, something that you're trying to translate is obviously something that you feel inside and you don't really have words for. And so I think more than the present moment, I think what I'm interested in is maybe some sort of like manifesting emotions and like making them visible. And a lot of times, I think just incorporating the body in new environments and in environments that are maybe either actually constructed like by me or digitally constructed, feels like a nice, like fresh way to kind of like remove the body from its everyday and like embed it in like a new sort of environment where new things are possible.
Well, you very graciously both provided a loop of images we're seeing behind us. And as we go deeper into photographing bodies, the act of photographing a body, can you tell us about one of these photographs and how you took it? Maybe you have a favorite body in a way of one of these photos?
I can talk about this one.
Perfect.
Okay, so this image is part of my sexual fantasy series, and I took it about 1 month or 2 months ago. So usually I make open calls. I say, if you identify as a woman and you want to share your sexual fantasies, send me an email. So this person sent me an email with telling me that she would like to meet, and we met and we spoke all night, and she told me about how as a kid she had an abusive mother, and her mom used to abuse her like with physical violence, and that as a kid she was very scared of herself. She was scared of taking a knife from the kitchen and to hurt her family with it. And she told me that as an adult, this turned into having the fantasy of just having a like sexual intercourse with a knife on her chest. And I just told her, "Is this the image?" And she told me yes. So we looked for a knife together. We bought this knife together, and we went in a field in Beirut, and we took this image. Yeah.
That's a strong story. What about you, David? Do you have any?
Yeah. That's intense. I'm gonna pick you up on the being afraid of hurting others. And so there's one self-portrait somewhere in the loop where I'm kind of growing these like mantis arms. I hope it's in the loop actually.
It's here, yeah.
Okay. And I took it very early on during the pandemic. I think it's about to come in. In the first weeks, kind of tied up at home, and entitled it Spring Fever. And I think for me it was a very interesting experience, feeling like my body was a danger to others, because I actually was very used to the feeling of feeling endangered and feeling like having to constantly be on the lookout. But all of a sudden being aware that oneself and involuntarily even one's body can be dangerous to others and even some sort of like weapon, made me want to take an image to kind of encapsulate that.
Yeah, and I think we'll go back to COVID, I think at the end of the conversation, because I do want to talk about how sometimes we feel imprisoned in our own bodies. But before that, I wanted to ask, do you ever feel compelled to photograph one gender more than the other? Or because sometimes your photos are more of women or more of men or in between?
It's hard to tell. I think not necessarily. I think, as I said before, I think what I'm super interested in is some sort of like non-binary representation. So in one sense, I mean that literally, and like showing and photographing non-binary bodies. And in another sense, I think I'm just super interested in anything that kind of like undoes gender or shows like, kind of like goes beyond it.
That actually goes quite well, because there's a great quote in Aperture describing your work, Myriam, as powerful women and tender men. Do you think this is accurate?
Oh, this is Manal Tahawi, and I love whatever she says. I think this is kind of what I'm looking for in a way in my images and in life in general also. But to answer the first question, in my case, for example, in my latest series, I am looking to photograph people who identify as women because it's a thing of identification. Like I am kind of looking for myself in them and looking for people who are kind of in their bodies in the same situation as me, in a way. Yeah. Yes.
What about you, David? I mean, your images are also quite tender in their treatment of masculinity.
I think, what I'm quite interested in is also just the power within that, like the power within vulnerability, and kind of like, maybe just, maybe it's just that actually. I mean, what you said before, powerful women, tender men, but actually also just the power within softness for everyone.
Exactly, this is what I wanted to say, like to find in each person what is kind of what society teaches us to hide, like, and this is why it makes sense in this sentence, like soft men because men are taught. Yeah.
Yeah, how that can be powerful as well.
Just another thing also, yesterday I was taking pictures for the sexual fantasy series, and I was photographing a woman who looks very tender and soft and like very shy, and then during the picture she told me, but you know what, I don't know what people see in me when they look at me, but I really want to dominate in that, like, and yeah, it goes a bit with what you were saying.
Yeah, I guess you never know what you're gonna get.
Exactly.
And you've already mentioned, David, a self-portrait that you took. That's the photo you were talking about earlier. But you both do self-portraiture. One of the photos you submitted as well was a self-portrait. Why is this? Why are you? Most photographers seem to like to be behind that camera, no? Not in front of it.
I think for me it was a journey. So the photographers I was talking about earlier that I kind of found online. Actually, a lot of them were doing self-portraits, and even without knowing that, I at least felt like I was drawn to their work a lot of the time. And upon finding out that there were self-portraits, it all began to kind of like click and like make sense and fall into place. And I feel like a lot of times self-portraiture is a super interesting way to deal with kind of like to work around this like a power dynamic that you usually have, or that you might like run at risk of having within like traditional photography. And on another hand, it's also it's very convenient, like not having to communicate with anyone else, not having to enter into dialogue. Like occasionally I think it might actually, the most productive dialogue to have is the one that you have with yourself, and opening up that window of being seen and seeing yourself and questioning yourself, and realizing like, yeah, what a camera does and how other people might perceive you, and like trying different ways of like performing yourself. I think all of those are like super interesting starting positions that I also feel like give me more empathy when I then approach other people to photograph them. Yeah.
I agree with you on so many levels, and from one side, like taking self-portraits and putting ourselves in our work through self-portraits or any other way, like through diary or anything else, it's a way of like breaking this binarity that is in traditional photography, and this binarity and kind of power that can happen, and abuse of power, of course, that can happen between in front and behind the camera, and it's a way of breaking this and having something more circular in a way. And also for me it's a way of, because I always take a lot of selfies with my phone, because it's with the phone it's a way of seeing yourself, and I'm also obsessed with finding myself in reflections and mirror, etc. And for me self-portraits with an actual camera is kind of torture, because but it's like an exercise for me, because it's a way of understanding your place in space. And usually I use photography to do this. Like when you're behind the camera, you can have kind of a sense of maybe delusional control of things, because you how do you say this? You put things together. I don't have the word. It's okay. And taking self-portraits, it's a way of understanding this without this control. It's like being thrown in space and trying to understand this. Yeah.
Now, David, you just said that taking photos of yourself makes you more empathetic to taking photos of other people. How do you approach taking photos of people's bodies? Because it's a very intimate act, right? Both of your works are very physical. So how do you make the subject comfortable?
I mean, there's like a variety of ways. I mean, first of all, so I photograph a lot of different people. I might photograph family or acquaintances or strangers from the internet. And so there's definitely like a range that is quite interesting, because a lot of time I feel like with people who are very close to me, we might actually need to establish some sort of distance while photographing in order to properly make it work. And with strangers, I feel like regularly I'm surprised by how incredibly fast and incredibly intimate we're open to get with someone who doesn't know us at all, just because it's so much easier to let walls fall, maybe, or because we don't care so much about the way that we are being perceived. And so, yeah, I think then obviously it just becomes a question of making sure that one's visions are aligned and seeing what everyone is comfortable with and is looking for in this sort of interaction and encounter. Yeah, and a lot of times actually because there's comfort and there's comfort, and I think that a lot of times also what I know from self-portraiture is that it might be incredibly uncomfortable, and that might be part of the process. And so you just need to establish some sort of framework where that is okay, and where you know that at the end of the day you are safe and that you're in control. But at the same time, there's this openness to discomfort that feels quite important.
Yeah. I don't have one answer for this, but I think it's like any encounter in life. It's when you're with someone, you naturally put the person in front of you comfortable, because you give a space for this person, by listening to them, with many things, human things. I think it's the same in photography for me. And as you were talking about the discomfort part, I think that it's also part of it to embrace it sometimes. And sometimes I am very shy when taking pictures, and I am uncomfortable. So it's like any encounter in life, I think.
Have you found it harder, this is for you, Myriam, to take photos of women in Lebanon than in other places, or is it the same?
I think it's the same anywhere. A lot of people tell me that in Lebanon it's more special because a lot of people outside of Lebanon tell me this, because it's less developed. A lot of people say this, but I think that anywhere in the world we have this need to talk about this, because anywhere in the world it's sexual fantasies are things that are it's a whole world inside of each one of us, and we just don't talk about it. So anywhere in the world it's the same process of taking everything that's here and putting it out there. And yes, anywhere I go, people want to talk about this. In Lebanon too. Yeah, it's.
So David, do you think, this is quite a difficult one, but I wanted to ask it. Do you think we wear our bodies, or our bodies wear us?
Dum dum dum.
That's your question, not mine.
Can you redefine if we are our bodies? Wait, because were, you use the past form. What is the past tense in here? I think that, getting very philosophical here. I do think that what I am quite interested in sometimes is, I guess, some sort of dissonance between ourselves and the bodies that we find ourselves in, and in maybe fixing that in photography. And so I guess what I do a lot of the time when I merge bodies, and bodies take new shapes and forms, is that in a way what I feel like it enables me to do, and what I hope it enables other people to do, is to feel like they may escape some sort of categorization that they've already been subjected to, and so all of a sudden you literally become this thing that is unfathomable, or that can't be, where maybe fear is all of a sudden appropriate, or where maybe I don't know, you really look powerful just as you feel. So I think that might be a gap that I'm trying to close in the work.
Yeah, I think we can all see it in the images behind us. What about you, Myriam? Do you think we wear our bodies, or our bodies wear us?
I think it's both, and I think that for me, it also answers one of your first questions, why bodies? For me, the body is what is between the world inside of us and outside of us, and this is why there is so much pressure on it. At least I feel a lot of pressure on my body. But yeah, I think it's both. I'll think about it tonight.
Yeah, no, the question came because I was thinking about how a lot of people just see the body as a vessel for the soul in a way, or as a vessel for who we are.
I saw it like this.
But we've been talking a lot about the body as an exploration of the self, and I want to lead this into the body as a side of politics, because both of your work in a different way it touches on this. Myriam, maybe first you can tell us, your images have been described as desire as power, as a powerful thing. How can the desire you photograph be an act of body politics?
Okay. For me, bodies in general are not playground. It's like a context for politics, and for me, the opposite is difficult. Like detaching both. Like for example, sometimes it's very tiring to, for example, having hair under your armpits and being reduced to a political statement, or walking in Beirut without a bra and having all the attention on your nipples and being reduced to a political statement. Like, yeah, no, I'm just shy. I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be reduced to this today. I just don't want the attention. Like, yeah, so for me it's more the opposite. Am I answering to the question?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, yeah. In an unexpected way. What about you, David? Your images are also laced with sexuality and fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I think about is longing, maybe, and like some sort of ache or some sort of need, and like this distance between you and what you want or where you want to be, and so yeah, trying to again address some sort of gap in the way that one does that. Yeah, in a way that's, I guess, inherently political, and then. I don't know, I mean, thinking about desire, I'm also just really interested maybe in this sort of like, in this state of maybe ecstasy, where we're not fully sure sometimes if it's like, is this like the peak of life, or is this like being on the cusp of like death, or just this like, sort of like in-between state, and this limbo I also find quite powerful. To evoke in photography, just because the medium itself is also so in between. Like, we don't know what happens before, we don't know what happens after. We just have this moment that's like ripped out of context, and that has like, that holds all this power, where we bring all these different narratives to it, and at the same time, yeah, it stands on its own.
And are you trying to evoke anything with black bodies? Are you trying to touch that subject at all, or are you completely escaping it?
No, definitely. I mean, I think it all like flows together, and I mean, particularly, I mean, any marginalized body, the way, like the narratives that exist around it, kind of like have fixed all these images of these bodies in our heads, and so I think that is like super interesting to undo, and it feeds into what I said before about like being interested in the unseen, and so. Maybe, yeah, I think in particular, obviously, like blackness, there's just so many ways to address it, whether it is through vulnerability, or about the relationship between blackness and nature. There's just, I don't know, yeah, it is definitely a topic that I keep like working with and around, and that's kind of like the framework, I think, for what I do. Maybe. Yeah, rather than maybe the center of it a lot of times, even though there is the main series that I worked on for the past few years, Mara Monstrum or John and My Magic, was very particularly about the relationship, for example, between blackness and water, and regarding maybe images that I felt we were constantly confronted with ever since 2015 and 2016 of black bodies and water, in certain like highly political entanglements, and trying to then kind of like give this relationship a new and more empowering spin, where this yeah, even the balance from like between being dehumanized and then trying to make images that overly like humanize black bodies to make them more accessible and understandable, trying to withdraw from that maybe and trying to see if there's a way to kind of reclaim the monstrous, or to, yeah, so what is it within blackness that we can still find empowering on its own without trying to like level all of its like individuality, like individual nuances. Oh.
Great. Well, I'm mindful of time because I want to open it up to questions if anybody has any, but I do want to come back to the COVID question, because when I started to think about bodies and both of your works, obviously COVID came up because we have been living in this state of confinement, and the body has been considered as both a prison but also as a place of expression and delight and happiness. It's what gives us life. So I wanted to ask you both, has confinement and what we've lived through over the last years changed your view of the body and the way you photograph the body?
From my side, the confinement arrived after the revolution, and after the revolution, so it was after a super intense phase, and it was a way of slowing things down, and I am a very slow person, so it was perfect for me. And so in this sense, for me, it's like how I feel is related to my work and photography, but in this sense, it made me understand myself better and feel better in my own body, the fact that everything was in my own rhythm and not like the words very quick and overwhelming rhythm. Yeah. Yes, but this disappeared quickly because of the explosion in Lebanon. Like the confinement lasted. It didn't mean anything after the explosion. Like, yeah.
Yeah, but your work is very much about the physicality of human bodies, and in confinement there was a lot of loneliness. There was a lot of lack of human touch.
Yeah, actually, photography is also perfect for me because there is this intense moment where you're close to people and you experience things in a very intense way, and then you can like take yourself away and process things slowly, and I need this time, so for me it was good. Yeah, and this loneliness was good. Not loneliness, but like, yeah.
What about you, David?
Yeah, I don't know if I can tie like link it to my work already. I mean, in general, I think the way I have constructed my life is like quite. I feel like the loneliness didn't like really hit me that hard. Like I've been lucky, just like been able to isolate with close people, and to have been like quite. Yeah, I feel like I was quite lucky in that regard. But I do think it just made me think a lot about the responsibility that we have for each other. As I said before, that the danger that we can pose to each other. The ways in which we are connected and entangled, whether we like it or not, like whether we deny it or not. And so I think that's just been rendered more clear and like acute and urgent, even though it was like an awareness that was around before. So I guess in a way, it might just I don't think it really changed the way I think about bodies as much as about, like the ethics of how we like carry ourselves, and also maybe more even about the structures that are supposed to be there to kind of catch us.
Great. Well, wrapping it up, just so we receive any questions from any of you, I just wanted to get any advice from both of you to any young photographers or not so young photographers who might want to make a splash in the scene like you have and photograph bodies. What would be your advice to them?
I can start.
I can.
So I can have time to think about it.
Yeah, I can. I mean, I don't know if I have like a particular body-related advice. I would need to think about that. But in general, I mean, just making a lot of work, holding it like close to you, making sure that what you put out you stand behind. I think that is always like a super, like a good like the way to go, and then whether the work speaks for itself, or you try to take an approach where you go through, where you connect more with others and pick up on that. I think all doors are technically open, and yeah, I think the only thing that may actually be super helpful is this, if one is interested in like portraiture. I do feel like there is this space of like self-portraiture that is open for experimentation and trying things out on your own terms. That was really helpful and empowering to me, and I know quite a few other people that I know, so it might be like worth a try.
Thank you, David.
I would just say, just be honest with yourself and don't try to fit in anything. Just explore through photography whatever you want to explore in your own way. Yeah.